For this short screencast, we're going to go over the image called the Grave Stele of Hegeso. It is image number 36 in your AP Art History book from ancient Greece. It is attributed to Callimachus. So when they say attributed to, what they mean by that is knowing what we know about this artist, Callimachus, and his style. Even though we don't know 100% for sure if he is the artist, there's so many stylistic similarities that we are attributing this piece of artwork to this artist. We are assuming that it was probably created by the same person. This is from 410 BCE. We are looking at marble, and originally there was paint involved, but of course since then all that paint has worn off. So we already talked about how it was attributed to the sculptor Callimachus, and it is a stele that was used as a grave marker. And in ancient Grecian times, grave markers were called craters. So quite often this type of sculpture would be called a crater. Its other function that it is funerary art. Craters were widely used during the geometric period of ancient Greece. Basically, it's commissioned by a family for a specific person, much like our traditions today. They're definitely far more expensive and exclusive than pottery. So pottery, which we will learn about later in ancient Greece, was also used as a crater, as a grave marker of sorts. And that was much more affordable. So this type of a stele or a crater definitely shows a status symbol. That it cost a heck of a lot more money than a piece of pottery. It's definitely known to be one of the finest grave steles surviving today, where it is mostly intact. Now, of course, we've lost some of the painted features, but structurally, pretty much all of it is still intact. It is erected and located in a cemetery in Athens, Greece, and the exterior of this stele is shaped to be representative of a small temple. The architectural features that frame the interior figures are definitely reminiscent of a small temple space. The scene that we're looking at commemorates the death of Hegeso. Hegeso is the woman that is seated in the chair, and the inscription identifies her as well as the other figure across from her, which is her standing servant. What we are looking at here is a genre scene. So this is a new term, but a term that we will hear and visit quite often. A genre scene means that it's kind of like a domesticated picture where you're capturing a moment in time, almost like a private little moment in time, that it's about everyday life. We're not creating anything that is about the divine or kind of over glorified. It's a very quiet type of content, and that's what a genre scene describes. Okay. Within this genre scene, what is happening here is we have a woman who is Hegeso, and what she's doing is examining a piece of jewelry in her right hand, and that's what her fingers are clenching. And in her left hand, sandwiched between her hand and her servant, is a jewelry box. And we're thinking that maybe in terms of interpretation, what Hegeso might be examining is her dowry. Dowries were basically a compiling of valuable things, oftentimes golds and jewelries and things like that, but sometimes a dowry could also be things like livestock and other types of materials that are of value that you offer to a husband's family to bridge a marriage. So perhaps she is examining her dowry. Her feet, as you notice down below, are resting on a footstool, which also kind of shows that she is a slightly upper class. Funerary art tends to idealize and articulate a society's social living through the depiction of a domestic sphere. So what that means is that we're taking this quiet genre scene, we're taking this kind of domestic lens into a moment with Hegeso, but at the same time, it is expressing and definitely conveying kind of like an idealistic part of society. So the fact that she has this jewelry, the fact that she has this dowry, and is seated on a footstool, those are things that really kind of show idealistically what she wants to be known for, remembered for, especially her status, but yet it's all kind of subtly put into this small little quiet genre scene. Athenian funerary monuments were increasingly depicting women, and that's because that mirrors society, as their civic importance definitely were on the rise and increased during ancient Greek times. So we start to see more and more evidence of women. Now be careful, because when you look at a lot of Grecian art, you see a lot of women. But remember, those are mainly goddesses. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about mortal women kind of engulfed in civic life. And as ancient Greece kind of develops, we see more and more evidence of that. The actual jewelry that Hegeso is examining is not there, and that's because that part of this stele was actually painted in. It wasn't carved, therefore it's not visible today. In terms of our carving, we are looking at a bas relief carving, so it is fairly shallow, and what we're also want to take note of is her attire. So her chiton, which is kind of her drapery, it has this feel of being extremely transparent. We're going to talk a lot about that in regards to how the Greeks were known for modeling their drapery, and how that was definitely a stylistic value for ancient Greece. They have this remarkable talent to make these folds and this drapery look as if they're almost transparent and see-through, when in all actuality we know that they're not. We know that they're carved out of mostly marble, they're extremely opaque, but the way that they model it up against the form of the body gives the illusion of transparency. With this illusion of transparency, though, the artist has still kept a bit of modesty. The clinging to the body is not at all erotic or suggestiveness. That even though it's transparent, it is still quite modest. Her hairstyle also allows us to understand kind of her social status. We know that socially, a specific hairstyle was representative of the goddess Aphrodite, and that is the hairstyle that Hegeso is displaying. Now, her servant, on the other hand, has a much simpler hairstyle, which again shows the difference between social status. Hegeso's maidservant stands as a symbol of her overall status, but also her freedom, that she is an independent woman, and that she is, actually an unmarried woman, and she comes from a family of status and elitism. We are definitely looking at figures that are carved in a naturalistic style. They're not stylized, so they're not simplified, They are not kind of abstracted, that they are modeled with enough detail to make it look like a kind of a very realistic and naturalistic looking human, looking female, looking figure. We have so much beautiful depth perception with the folds of the drapery. You can definitely spend a lot of time here on your elements and principles. We can see value changes because of the different depths that are carved within the folds of the drapery. It, it casts a shadow naturally and therefore creates different values. We're able to know that one fold is deeper than another and some folds are subtle, and that's because of the depth of perception created by the deepness of the carvings. We have a shadow of emotion that reflects absence of individuality. So again, we have a very kind of calm, I wouldn't necessarily call it stoic, but the faces of the women are non-expressive. They're free of expression, and by doing so, we're definitely losing some of those values and some of those characteristics of individuality. On the next slide here, I've just put together some close-ups so you can get a better understanding. Right here shows how her hand would have been clenching one of her pieces of jewelry. And remember, that was painted on. So we don't have evidence of that today. It wasn't part of the carving, but it was part of the painting. Remember too that this entire stele at one time was completely covered in paint. So it was very bright and colorful, which also added to some of its naturalistic values. Letting you see some of the alterations here of, even though it's still bas relief carving, we do have differences in depth. So right here around the head and in the neck, you have some very deep carvings. And then if you look below, we have some shallow carvings that show just some simple folds of her drapery. This difference of depth creates values by casting shadows in all of the right places. The same with our hand. We know that if our hand was curled like that, it would definitely cast that shadow in there. So by paying attention to which areas are carved deeper, it's really added to that perception of depth. And here's just another image to show you the quality of the carvings, but also in what great shape this stele is. Again, everything is extremely intact. We're allowed to see most of the details, and you can also kind of see the clearer architectural framing of this stele.